Good morning, everybody. It's good to see you all. Light, Ross. Light topic. Here we go. Leadership is certainly a really hot topic just now. This week, we've had the first televised leadership debates as we approach the general election. Our political leaders are all trying to persuade us that they are the most able to lead our country. Nearer to home, at the academy this week, the head pupils were announced, and in the next few days, the house captains, the sports captains, buddies, and other roles will all be decided. Here at church, as has been mentioned, our lead pastor, Stuart, has abandoned us for 3 months. While he has a much-needed sabbatical. So this week, Ruth, Andy, and I picked up our additional leadership responsibilities as we try our best to cover for Stuart. In fact, this year across the world is being called Elections Year. During 2024, half of the world's population has the opportunity to vote. We're all very aware of the UK and the US elections, but there are elections in over 50 countries. Among them India, Mexico, Russia, Taiwan, South Africa, Indonesia, El Salvador, Bangladesh. Today, the voting for the European Parliament concludes and the new MEPs will be announced across Europe. An article I read recently said that across the world, voters in democratic countries share a common sentiment. You might identify. They're unhappy with their governments and leaders. A Londoner was quoted. He said, "It feels like we're second-class people. Our MPs don't represent us people. Political leaders don't understand what we go through. Do they listen to people? I don't think they do." And a person from Jakarta echoed similar sentiments, saying, "It's difficult to trust them, since they only want to reach their goals. As long as they achieve their goals, they will forget everything else." So, what do we expect from our leaders? Let's just take a moment to think about the leaders we have known, whether political leaders, church leaders, leaders in our workplaces, or in other contexts. What are the characteristics of good leaders? And what are the characteristics of the not so good leaders? Let's just think for a moment. Perhaps that's something you could think about a bit more during the week and perhaps even discuss in your Connect groups. The next slide. Some of us, in fact, many of us have leadership responsibilities towards others in our families, in our workplaces, in church life, and in other organizations that we're part of. So let's take a moment to think about how we lead. Brings it a bit personal, doesn't it? Not just out there, how they lead. How do we lead? I wonder if we consistently live out the characteristics of good leaders that we've just identified as we thought. That's another question to ponder during the week. Being a leader is certainly not an easy role. We sometimes try things that don't work out. We make mistakes. We live with ongoing, constant change. We're working with other people. Leadership doesn't come with a script or an instruction manual or a helpful glass ball to see into the future and help with today's decisions. So how can we be healthy leaders? And how can we support our leaders to lead in a healthy way? Well, as Ross has already said, let's think about Jesus. What did he say? How did he model leadership? We could today have drawn inspiration from any of the thousands of books that have been written about leadership. Or I could tell you my leadership story. But today, it really is best practice, as in every day, to focus on Jesus. So our Bible reading for this week gives us an example of two different types of leaders. We have Jesus and we have the Pharisees. And just before we read the scripture, just a wee background about the Pharisees. The Pharisees were an influential religious sect within Judaism. They were mostly middle-class businessmen. They were leaders of synagogues. And though they were a minority in the Jewish ruling body, the Sanhedrin, they held a minority number of positions as priests, but they seemed to control the decision-making within the Sanhedrin, the council, because they had a lot of popular support among the people. They were known for their strict observance of the rules and the rites and ceremonies as written in the Old Testament Torah. But over the years, they had also added their own oral traditions to the law, and they gave equal authority to these additional laws as to those that were given by God to Moses. And this interaction that we're going to read about today between Jesus and the Pharisees helps us to understand what Jesus' views about leadership are. So let's read together from Matthew 12, starting at verse 22. They brought to Jesus a man who was possessed by a demon that made him unable to see or speak. Jesus healed him so that the sick man was able to talk and see. All the crowds were astonished. "He can't be David's son, can he?" they said. The Pharisees heard this. "The fellow can only cast out demons," they said, "because he's in league with Beelzebul, the prince of demons." Well, Jesus knew their thoughts. "Suppose a kingdom is split down the middle," he said to them. "It'll go to rack and ruin. If a city or a household is split down the middle, it's doomed. And if the Satan drives out the Satan, he's split down the middle. So how can his kingdom stay standing? What's more, if I cast out demons by Beelzebul, whose power are your people channeling when they cast them out? Yes, they'll tell you what's what. But if I'm casting out demons because I'm in league with God's Spirit, then God's kingdom has arrived on your doorstep." Look at it like this. Suppose you want to break into a strong man's house and steal his belongings. How are you going to do that unless you first tie up the strong man? Then you can plunder his house to your heart's content. If you're not with me, you're against me. Unless you're gathering the flock with me, you're scattering it. So let me tell you this. People will be forgiven for every sin and blasphemy. But blasphemy against the Spirit will not be forgiven. But if anyone speaks a word against the Holy Spirit, it won't be forgiven, either in the present age or in the age to come. You must make up your mind between two possibilities, Jesus went on. Either the tree is good, in which case its fruit is good, or the tree is bad, in which case its fruit is bad. You can tell the tree by its fruits, after all. You're a family of snakes. How can you say good things when you're bad inside? What the mouth speaks is what fills the heart. A good person produces good things from a good storeroom. An evil person produces evil things from an evil storeroom. Let me tell you this. On Judgment Day, people will have to own up to every trivial word they say. Yes, you will be vindicated by your own words, and you will be condemned by your own words. Is that okay? Clear? Yeah? Easy? Straightforward? Yeah. I must admit, I took a big deep breath when I realised the passage I had to preach on. But I've actually found it incredibly enlightening to actually look at this passage through this lens of healthy leadership. And it's changed perhaps how I've always looked at this passage in the past. And I hope some of what I've gleaned or discovered through my preparation will help you as well in this. So in this passage, we start off, we've got the account of Jesus healing a man. Wow. Restoring this man and allowing to live free from the awful limitations he had been living with. He was now able to talk and to see, able to engage in life and community again. Most of the crowd were rightly astonished. They were amazed at this healing miracle, and they wondered, hopefully, if Jesus could be the Son of David, could be the Messiah, the one who was promised that they were all waiting for. The crowds recognized something in Jesus that gave them hope for the future, hope for them as individuals, and hope for their oppressed, broken society. Jesus noticed hurting individuals. He consistently did right through the Gospels. And he used his God-given power to serve them, to bring positive change, freedom, and healing. Jesus demonstrated that he had real power, and the people in the crowd attributed the source of that power to God. Could Jesus be the one they'd been waiting for, the one that would lead them out of bondage? Contrast that with the Pharisees. They were part of the crowd too, but they had a very different perspective on what had happened. Suddenly, this conversation begins to sound rather contemporary, with a power struggle and discussion about sources of power. A big deflection from the actual issue of Jesus healing a man through the power of God. The Pharisees were trying desperately to put Jesus down so that they wouldn't lose face. And they resorted to lies and to blasphemy in the process. Did you watch any of the leadership debates this week? Jesus wasn't going to let them get away with this, though. You see, if the Pharisees had acknowledged that Jesus operated in the power of God, it would make them look really bad. The Pharisees had made a huge show of being godly, of keeping all the rules and the extra rules, of praying on street corners and parading their piety. But they didn't heal people. They actually restricted the people. They tied them up in rule keeping. They didn't model for them a fruitful relationship with the living God. They didn't serve the people in that power. So instead of acknowledging God's power at work through Jesus, it suited them to attribute Jesus' power to a demonic source. So Jesus explained to the crowd and to the Pharisees that their argument just wasn't logical. Why would Satan fight against himself? Why would the power of evil cast out evil? That doesn't make sense. It's not logical. And the opinion of the Pharisees wasn't true either. Jesus went on to say, if you're not on my side, you're against me. And then makes this tricky comment about the unforgivable sin, which over the years since has often tripped people up and caused unnecessary fear among good and godly people. Because from the context of this statement, it seems that Jesus is specifically speaking to the Pharisees. He was talking about the way that they'd attributed his power source to the evil one. And this sin, the unforgivable sin that the Pharisees had committed, was not simply unbelief or rejection of Jesus, but they had clear knowledge of who Jesus was. They knew that the power of God through the Holy Spirit was working through Jesus. And yet they willfully and deliberately chose to reject the facts about Christ, despite the evidence, and they slanderously attributed the power of God to the power of Satan. That seems to be what Jesus was talking about. Theologian Louis Berkhoff explains that the unforgivable sin consists not in doubting the truth, nor in a sinful denial of the truth, but in a contradiction of it that goes contrary to the conviction of the mind, to the illumination of the conscience, and even to the verdict of the heart. Wow. Well, at this point, Jesus realized he was getting quite deep. It was getting a bit heavy. It was getting a bit complicated. And so he gives us a nice, straightforward picture to help us understand what he's saying about leadership, especially the way that the Pharisees lead the people. He talks here about a good tree producing good fruit and a bad tree producing bad fruit. There's consistency, isn't there, between the fruit and the tree. And by implication, therefore, that good people bring good things out of their hearts and evil people bring evil things out of their hearts. And this is particularly evident in how people speak. Jesus warns that the leaders will one day have to give account for every careless word that they have spoken. few chapters later in Matthew's Gospel, Jesus talks some more about the Pharisees. And I'd like us to turn our attention to this passage. This is one that we can use honestly and carefully as we consider what makes a good leader. So I'm going to read from the start of Matthew chapter 23, and I'm reading it out of the Message translation or version. Now Jesus turned to address his disciples, along with the crowd that had gathered with him. The scribes and Pharisees are competent teachers in God's law. You won't go wrong in following their teachings on Moses, but be careful about following them. They talk a good line, but they don't live it. They don't take it into their hearts and live it out in their behavior. It's all spit and polish veneer. Instead of giving you God's law as food and drink by which you can feast on God, they package it in bundles of rules, loading you down like pack animals. They seem to take pleasure in watching you stagger under these loads and wouldn't think of lifting a finger to help. Their lives are perpetual fashion shows, embroidered prayer shawls one day and flowery prayers the next. They love to sit at the head of the table at synagogue, basking in the most prominent positions, preening in the radiance of public flattery, receiving honorary degrees and getting called doctor and reverend. Don't let people do that to you, to put you on a pedestal like that. You all have a single teacher, and you are all classmates. Don't set people up as experts over your life, letting them tell you what to do. Save that authority for God and let him tell you what to do. No one else should carry the title of Father. You have only one Father, and he's in heaven. And don't let people maneuver you into taking charge of them. There is only one life leader for you and them, Christ. Do you want to stand out? Then step down. Be a servant. If you puff yourself up, you'll get the wind knocked out of you. But if you're content to simply be yourself, your life will count for plenty. Jesus makes it clear that people can have excellent theological understanding, but that doesn't necessarily change them. And living out God's law is actually what's important. I came across this quote from Zach W. Lambert recently. It says, if your theology doesn't result in more kindness, more grace, and more love for your fellow humans, then it is not the theology of Jesus. That's one to chew on a bit, isn't it? If your theology doesn't result in more kindness, more grace, and more love for your fellow humans, then it is not the theology of Jesus. In the passage we've just read, when Jesus said they talk a good line, but they don't live it, is a hugely challenging statement. And it could never be applied to Jesus, who lived out what he said and is our supreme example of humble, faithful servant leadership. This is the leadership that we're all called to. In St. John's, we have 3 values that we're trying to live out. Firstly, we're working at pursuing God's will together. We want to be led by God, and we all have a part to play in listening to God and following what he says. We do not operate with leaders on pedestals telling the rest of us what to do. In fact, a big part of leadership in St. John's is listening to God and to each other and discerning together the next right thing God is asking us to do. The second of our values is that everyone gets to play. Isn't it helpful from this passage in Matthew 23 to think that we're all classmates learning from Jesus? We have one life leader, and he's Jesus. None of us are disqualified due to our age, our gender, our employment, our health, our marital status, our academic ability, our class, or anything else. We all have a significant role to play in being Jesus' people here and in our communities. And our third value is that we relate to one another by honouring each other, working towards a culture of honour. We can each be ourselves. We don't all have the same interests, abilities, or strength, but we can bring our unique selves with humility, bringing out the best in one another And together we can serve each other and our neighbours. So to conclude, I want to share a meditation written by Godfrey Birtle. And it was part of one of the Northumbria prayers that we shared this week. And again, it's an open invitation if anybody's around at around 11 o'clock, Monday to Thursday, to join in. It's a really special time that we have together. So let's reflect together prayerfully as I share this. And the worship band, if you want to join me back up, that would be great. When I look at the blood, all I see is love, love, love. When I stop at the cross, I can see the love of God, but I can't see competition. I can't see hierarchy. I can't see pride or prejudice or the absence of the abuse of authority. I can't see lust for power. I can't see manipulation. I can't see rage or anger or selfish ambition. I can't see unforgiveness. I can't see hate or envy. I can't see stupid fighting or bitterness or jealousy. I can't see empire building. I can't see self-importance. I can't see backstabbing or vanity or arrogance. I see surrender, sacrifice, salvation, humility, righteousness, faithfulness, grace,